Raising a redhead. Alec and I had been married for 3 years. We'd been together for 6, met each other during our college years. If you went back in time and told me I'd be getting married to that guy, I probably would have laughed right in your face. Funny how life worked. My parents had never liked having a gay son. I'd been 13 when I came out to them, and it had caused a big fuss. My mother just couldn't fathom it. Her precious little Jude wouldn't be bringing a girl home someday? Eventually, they just decided to pretend I'd never come out in the first place. Maybe they'd hope I would change my mind or something. I don't know. They'd frequently ask me about girls, to which I would simply reply with a blank stare because, seriously? This continued throughout my high school years. I'd been a quiet, reserved gay kid living in a small town, so I naturally hadn't had a lot of dating opportunities. That, of course, changed when I went to college and was finally properly exposed to the world. I brought Alec home at the end of my second year. Naturally, things didn't go super well. Tears, yelling, talks of being a disappointment, the whole package. For a while, I had to live with Alec and his family, who were, thankfully, a lot more accepting of their son's sexuality than my folks were. It certainly hadn't been a fun time. I thought I had well and truly lost my parents. If not for Alec's support, I don't know what would have happened. Eventually, they seemed to realize that I wasn't going to change. Slowly and awkwardly, they started to reach out again. I was hurt, but I decided to give them a chance. Perhaps it was possible to repair what had been damaged. At that point, Alec and I had been dating for a little over 6 months. I could tell that my parents still would have much preferred having a straight son, but I wasn't, and they couldn't exactly do anything about that. A somewhat uneasy peace was established. I was able to start bringing Alec over for family gatherings without much concern. It was worth it, of course. Alec was my soulmate. He was achingly handsome, with his curly honey brown hair, his freckle-dusted face, and those big brown eyes that made my heart melt whenever I stared into them. But more importantly, he was the kindest, gentlest person I had ever met. When he had taken interest in me, he had made many attempts to softly coax me out of my shell. I had found him rather annoying at first because all I wanted was to be left alone. But he grew on me exponentially, and it was because of this love for him that I was willing to fight through whatever I had to do to keep him in my life. The day we had finally stood in front of each other and said our vows, it was all I could do to stop myself from bawling like a baby on the spot. It felt like an overwhelming victory. Well, it had been. Little did I know that there was yet another battle waiting for me around the corner. After 2 years, we managed to get a place for ourselves. It was by no means a luxury mansion, but it felt good not having to worry about rent. All we had to worry about were bills and taxes. How fun. Still, we did our best to make it our own. After another year, it was fully furnished and decorated to our tastes. It felt so good. We finally had our own little corner in the world, our private nook, where we could be with each other without anyone stopping us. We had 3 bedrooms in total. One was ours, obviously, and another served as a guest room. And the last one, well, that was also a guest room, but it didn't take long for me to notice Alex spending more and more time in there. Sometimes I would catch him standing in the middle of the room and staring at the bed or rearranging the furniture. When he finally turned to me in the bed one evening with a thoughtful expression on his face, I already knew what he was thinking. "Jude," he started, shifting closer to me. With a smile, I wrapped an arm around him and rested my chin on top of his head. "Hmm?" was my slightly sleepy response. "Well, I've been thinking," he continued. "You know how we talked about having kids a while ago?" "Mm-hmm," I hummed. "And how it's something we definitely want to do at some point?" My smile widened. Yeah, I remember that." "Well," Alex shifted in my arms to stare up at me. "I mean, we have our own place. We're financially stable and all that. I was wondering if now would be a good time to start that process." I laughed softly, gently curling my fingers into his hair. "It's about time you asked that. You've been walking around with this look of complete longing on your face for weeks now." Alec rolled his eyes, seeming slightly embarrassed. Yeah, you know me better than anyone else in the whole wide world, I know." "That doesn't answer my question." Teasing Alec was always fun, but I wanted the same thing that he did, of course. The idea of starting and raising a family with him sounded like heaven on earth. And well, I'd always wanted to be a dad. I knew this would be met with some opposition, primarily from my folks. My mother especially had been very fixated on the idea of having a biological grandchild, but I wasn't going to let that stop us. We had been about a month into doing our research when we decided to finally announce the news to our respective families. The reaction weren't as bad as I thought they would be. They were, in fact, worse. My parents didn't even bother to hide their disgust. How did we intend to raise a child without a mother, they said. They seemed completely repulsed by the idea of a household with two fathers. Really, I should have anticipated that. They had barely accepted the fact that I was gay. In fact, the words they said during that conversation made it clear to me that they hadn't really accepted it and had only been tolerating it to protect our peace. I felt a familiar hurt I hadn't felt in years, but I told them we had already been entertaining the idea and they wouldn't be able to stop us if we truly made that decision. Afterwards, I left. I knew that I wouldn't be able to change their minds, at least not for a while. The real surprise came when Alec, near tears, told me that his parents just had a similar reaction. We're fine with you being gay and everything, and Jude is a nice guy, but do you really think you'd be able to handle a kid? I could sense how betrayed he felt. I held him close in bed that night, comforting him in the same way he had comforted me in the past. Frankly, I didn't understand it. The love Alec and I had for each other was real, and I knew for a fact that we both had enough love to give a child as well. So why? We're still doing it though, right? My thoughts were interrupted by Alec's heavy voice. He raised his head to look up at me, his eyes still glossy with tears. I want to start a family with you, Jude. I don't care what anyone else says. I know we can do it, he sniffed. You'd make such an amazing dad. I melted. I hugged him closer, kissing the salty tears off his freckled cheeks. You would too. Of course we're still gonna do it. Since when were my parents able to stop me from doing what I want? You gotta learn how to be more rebellious, my love, I said gently. Alec let out a weak laugh. At that moment, we officially decided that we were going to adopt a child. There was just one problem. We had no idea how or where to start. This is how what I like to call the week of intense Googling began. We started by looking up what the adoption system in our state was like. This was how we learned we had quite a bit of research to do. We joined social media groups, did our best to get in touch with other parents who had adopted in the past or were looking to adopt just like we were. Alec ended up buying a bunch of books about adoption. It was a confusing but exciting stage. We found that our parents' sentiments weren't uncommon at all. Despite the fact that there were many kids out there who had been lovingly raised by gay and lesbian couples, quite a few people believed that it just wasn't right. What's up with that? Even if they didn't say it out loud, we got really good at figuring it out from their facial expressions and how their demeanor shifted the moment they realized. We trudged on. One of our families realized we were actually serious. There came several attempts to talk us out of it. My dad once insinuated that I'd be best if we didn't try to adopt, in case whatever child we ended up with would get adopted by a straight couple later in the future. I didn't speak to him for several weeks after he made that statement. I was baffled by his thought process. How could he think it'd be better for a child to remain without a home when there was a loving couple ready to take care of them? Things weren't much better on Alec's end either. Still, we trudged on. We called several adoption agencies, but eventually, we decided to work with one called Little Hearts, which was dedicated to giving kids from troubled situations a new home. Progress. Alec was so excited. He spent more time in the guest room, which we had already decided would be our child's room. We hadn't decided on a particular gender yet, but I did think Alec would make a fantastic girl dad. He'd been a big brother to 3 girls, after all. Speaking of Alec's sisters, they were quite thrilled at the news that they would be becoming aunts. This at least brought us a little comfort. The social worker who began working with us was a bubbly woman named Veronica. She spoke about 1,000 words per minute and had a way more energy than the average 50-something-year-old woman, but she was chill, very helpful. We met with her several times, handing over the documents she requested. Then, she told us she'd have to come to our house to check it out. With a warm smile, she had reassured us that she wasn't coming over to do some sort of strict inspection. All this is to make sure that you're capable of raising a child, she explained, in a sweet voice. In my opinion, that sounded exactly like an inspection, but I didn't say that. Her reassurance didn't stop me from sweating bullets. The days she was meant to come over, either. Alec had kneaded at my shoulders that morning in an attempt to ease my nerves, but the strength he was unknowingly putting into his fingers let me know that his nerves weren't any better. Veronica came and then she went. We wanted to believe the visit went well, but we couldn't exactly be sure of that until much later. So one can only imagine our delight when she called us to let us know we could begin searching for a child. We did eventually decide to adopt a little girl, but it wasn't set in stone. We were willing and ready to change that decision if we found a child we really connected with, regardless of their gender. Little Hearts had already a list of waiting children. We did have the option to look towards other agencies as well, but we figured this would be the most reasonable place to start. And thank the stars that we did. At once, an absolutely precious little girl named Amanda caught our eye. She was about 10 years old and with a head of curly red hair that really made her stand out. Like little Annie. Alec had cooed, gazing at her picture with nothing but adoration in his eyes. Veronica quickly exchanged information and got us in contact with Amanda's social worker, Jillian. We eventually received a profile of hers in return. We had to wait for quite a while, over 2 months, but eventually Jillian expressed her interest in our family. It was like a dream come true. Despite everything we had to put up with, it felt like we were finally getting closer to our dream. It had been about 6 months since we started the process. At that point, Alex began redecorating the room. He made sure not to fill it with anything too stereotypically pink or girly. Years of experience made him know that it was entirely possible for Amanda not to be into that stuff, despite being a little girl. I knew Alec would be a good dad to her, but I couldn't help but wonder if I would be. I was an only child, and while I was good with kids, I never really had to take care of one for extended periods of time. "Jude, trust me," Alec had told me, hugging me from behind and resting his cheek on my shoulder. "You'll be fine. I know you better than anyone else in the world, remember?" I sighed and held on to his hands. Being a good husband was one thing, but being a good father... It seemed Alec's family was starting to come around. His excitement when he talked to Amanda was pretty infectious, after all. His parents still seemed unsure, but it was becoming obvious they were thinking more deeply about it now. This became even more clear when they came to visit, and Alec showed them the room that he had prepared. My parents didn't talk to me much during this period of time. Were they ashamed of me? Disgusted? Maybe both. I didn't know. I didn't want to think about them too much. But I couldn't help but privately hope that they would eventually change their minds as well. We finally got the confirmation that our family had been selected for Amanda. I don't think I'll ever forget the day Veronica let us know. It was the second time she came over to visit, and she'd done it with a huge smile on her face. When she left, Alec and I cheered. Veronica had been frank in letting us know that there had been a high chance we wouldn't be selected at all, particularly because we were a gay couple. Another victory. Neither of us could sleep that night. We were so excited by the fact that we'd finally be able to meet our little angel. The first visit was rather brief, much briefer than I thought it would be anyway. I had imagined we'd spend the first visit doing a lot of talking and getting to know each other. Instead, Amanda had sat across from Alec and I in complete silence for about 5 minutes before any of us bothered to speak. And it was Alec who broke that silence. I was nervous out of my mind, and it brought me a little comfort to see that she was just as nervous as well. But of course she would be. We were a pair of strangers. Alec did most of the talking at first. He spoke to her in that familiar soothing voice of his, trying to coax her into speaking. Eventually, she started to answer his questions. They were brief answers, but they were answers all the same, which was a relief. My relief was short-lived, though, when I noticed her occasionally sending nervous glances my way. I realized, I haven't said a word. I tried to give her a reassuring smile. Quickly, her gaze snapped back to Alec's face. Crap, I must have looked terrifying to her. Alec had a much friendlier face, and it didn't help that I was one of those people who looked angry all the time, even when I wasn't. I badly wanted to say something, but I couldn't think of anything. Then, in a stroke of luck, "Do you want to watch cartoons, dear?" Alec asked. When Amanda nodded silently, he smiled gently. "Oh, awesome. What's your favorite?" Amanda's answer came quickly. "Dolph Wars." Alec's brows raised in surprise. He glanced at me as I sat up a little straighter. "Oh, I like that show," I said. Amanda looked over at me, visibly surprised, and then her expression turned incredulous, eyes narrowing slightly as she looked me up and down. "You do?" she asked. "Really?" I knew exactly what she was thinking. This 6-foot-something rough-around-the-edges man enjoyed a cartoon about living dolls fighting crime in the world of toys. Unlikely. I couldn't blame her for her suspicion. I smiled. "Really?" I answered. "I don't watch a lot of cartoons or anything, but Dolph Wars is one I watch a lot. I like the animation and the art style. The characters are funny. She didn't look convinced. Who's your favorite character? She asked. I let out an amused chuckle, a test to gauge if I was telling the truth. How cute. Cookie Cake, I answered. Her eyes widened slightly. I hoped that meant she approved of my choice. Okay, favorite episode? She continued. I hummed and thought, folding my arms and leaning back in my seat. I think I like the one where they all get lost at the beach, I said. It's one of the few times we see them outside of Kelly's bedroom, you know? Really like the change of environment. Plus, I like their outfits. Amanda and I continued to talk about her favorite show. Her doubtful expression soon changed to one of fascination and excitement, as she realized I wasn't lying. She became a lot more animated as she spoke, and we debated on how the cartoon story would end up going. I realized Alec hadn't spoken for a while. I glanced over and saw him watching us with a massive grin on his face. After about an hour, Jillian returned and our first visit came to an end. As they left, Amanda raised her little hand to wave goodbye. That night when we got home, Alec was so excited he couldn't sleep. He prattled on and on for ages. She's precious, Jude. Precious. Did you see her? Yes, love. I saw the child that we're working on adopting. All that hair. It's kind of like my own, though, isn't it? I've got to look up how to take care of it. Yes, love. I guess she does like girly things then. Or maybe it's just that show. What's it called again? Doll Girls? Doll Force, love. Right, Doll Force. It's so cute that you like the same show. I think she likes you, you know? I smiled. I thought it would be jumping the gun to assume we had fully broken the ice just because we happened to share an interest, but I was sure it helped significantly. Over the next 3 months, several visits, just like the first one, occurred. I had been right. It took a bit longer for Amanda to become really comfortable with Alec and I. But when she did, we were pleased to discover that she got very chatty when she was comfortable with you. And she was a pretty funny kid. It became a routine for her to first tell us about everything she had seen and found interesting since our last meeting. You know what I saw last week, Mr. Jude? She asked me. This is how she decided to address us. We didn't stop her, at least not yet. What did you see? I asked back. She reached into her pink princess-themed backpack and pulled out a notebook. She flipped through the pages before eventually stopping at a drawing of some sort of lump. Alec and I leaned over and looked at the drawing. Then we glanced at each other in visible confusion. Where did you see this, honey? Alec asked, looking back at the drawing. He squinted his eyes and tilted his head, trying to parse what the drawing was. Hanging off a tree branch, Amanda said. She stared at Jude and I with big expectant eyes, as if that information alone would be enough for us to tell what this dubious lump was. Ironically enough, it was that. Huh, that's a cocoon, isn't it? I suggested, tilting my head as well, like those things butterflies come out of. Oh hey, you might be right, Alec muttered his agreement. Amanda looked between the both of us in confusion. What's a cocoon? She asked. I raised a brow. How old had I been when I learned about the life cycle of a butterfly? Probably around her age, if not a bit longer. We explained the process of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. One of the things about children that no one really explains to you is the fact that they're just brand new humans. Of course, it's something that everyone knows, but no one ever talks about the fact that there's so much of the world that is a mystery to them. Things that are common, mundane knowledge to the average adult might as well be magic to a 10-year-old. Amanda was completely enamored with the idea of a crawly little bug turning into something as beautiful as a butterfly. Seated in between Alec and I, we watched videos of butterflies coming out of their cocoons. And that was the type of girl she was. Chatty, energetic, and extremely curious about the world. Aside from watching cartoons like most other kids, Amanda enjoyed reading and watching non-fiction like history or nature documentaries. At home, I purchased a set of children-friendly history books and neatly lined them up on the bookshelf I had installed in Amanda's room. As our visits were going on, Alec and I were made to fill several forms. 9 months after started the process of adopting a child, we finally got a date of placement. In other words, the day Amanda would be coming to live with us. We were finally going to be fathers. It had been such a long, often complicated process, but the fact that we would finally have our sweet little girl living with us made it completely and totally worth it. The time to finalize our adoption came. Alec and I attended a court session where a judge did this, after which we received Amanda's birth certificate, amended to officially recognize us as our parents, and a certificate of adoption. And then we picked Amanda and brought her home. For a couple of days, she went back to being quiet. She was clearly as excited to finally have a home as we were to finally be her parents. but we imagined it would take a while for her to truly settle down and get comfortable there. Maybe around a month? Or so we thought. On the morning of Amanda's 4th day home, I was awoken by a small tugging sensation on my big toe. I stirred awake. The sun was just coming up, and a quick glance at the alarm clock on our nightstand showed that it was just 5:30 a.m. Alec was still fast asleep. Another tug. I glanced down and saw a familiar head of red hair standing at the foot of our bed. I blinked groggily, pulling myself out of Alec's arms and sat up. "Amanda?" I muttered, scratching my head and yawning. "What's up?" Amanda pouted slightly. "You guys only have grown-up cereal." "Grown-up cereal?" I echoed in confusion, before realizing what she meant. Alec's boxes of fruit and fiber were most likely not very appealing to a 10-year-old. She stared at me expectantly. I sighed softly. I leaned down to whisper to Alec. "I'm heading to the store, love," I said. He mumbled a sleepy noise of acknowledgement as I climbed out of bed and pulled on a jacket. Amanda and I left the house at around 6 a.m. Amanda bundled up in her pajamas and the fluffy pink robe Alec had gotten her. What was supposed to be a quick trip to the store quickly turned into an adventure around our sleepy town. We stepped out of the supermarket after buying a few boxes of Fruit Loops when I realized that Amanda probably didn't know where she'd be going to school. I drove her there. It was a Saturday, so there were no kids there or anything, but she would be starting school the following Monday, so I figured it'd be a good idea to at least show her the building. Then I realized she didn't know where our playground was, so I drove her there next. I was watching her go up and down the slide when I got a call from a panicked Alec. "Jude, where are you? I've looked everywhere. Amanda's missing. I can't find her. She's not in her room, the living room, the backyard. She's gone." "Oh, she's right here with me," I said. "Probably should have told you she was coming with me. Sorry about that, babe." "What?" Alec responded, confused but audibly relieved. "Where are you guys?" "Is that Mr. Alec?" Amanda called from where she was climbing up to go down the slide again. "Tell him I'm on the slide." "We're at the playground," I told Alec. "She's on the slide." "Oh." Alec joined us about 15 minutes later. We both watched Amanda as she played on the swings. After that morning, Amanda went right back to being her animated chatty self. Maybe she had needed some of her favorite cereal. Amanda was finally a permanent member of our household. She started school the next week, and before we knew it, Alec and I were true and proper parents. Speaking of parents, there was the issue of ours. We had proceeded with and completed the process of adoption despite their reservations. Mine especially. Whether my parents liked it or not, they were grandparents now. Alec and I threw a party to celebrate and invited our family and friends. Naturally, both his and my parents attended. Amanda was excited to meet her grandparents and the rest of her extended family. My uncles and aunts and cousins came as well. Alec's parents very clearly still had their reservations. My parents were very clearly not happy, but everyone made an effort to make sure Amanda didn't see any of that. After all, when faced with her beaming smile, there was very little one could do but smile back. To our relief, she didn't notice the tension that hung in the air at several points during that party. "They'll come around," I thought, "and if they don't, that's too bad." Amanda fell asleep on the couch after the party, clearly exhausted. She looked completely adorable curled up in her pretty dress. As I went around cleaning up, Alec went over to scoop her up in his arms. She melted against him, wrapping her arms around his neck and nuzzling her face into his shoulder. Alec looked over at me, squeezing his eyes shut in a very "she's so cute" expression. I laughed softly, watching fondly as he turned and carried her to her bedroom. This was my family, the love of my life and my sweet child. I felt an overwhelming urge to protect them and love them as much as I could. I, of course, knew that there were going to be tough times ahead. Amanda was still just a little girl after all. I knew for a fact that things could start getting hairy by the time she entered her teenage years. Or maybe they would start getting hairy before then. With kids, you can't really know how they'll turn out. You can only do your very best to give them the support they need and hope for the best, which is exactly what Alec and I did. Amanda quickly rose to the top of her class. Her naturally inquisitive mind made her actually enjoy school. You never had to tell her to do stuff like do her homework or study for tests. Unfortunately, her curiosity was a double-edged sword. While it made her more eager to learn things that she should know, it also made her likely to learn things that she shouldn't. By the time she was 12, she had developed a raging curiosity about sex and sexuality. It was rather awkward conversation to have for sure, but we figured it would be best for her to learn some of these things from us than from an outside source that could take advantage of her naivety. It certainly didn't help that, less than a year later, Amanda got her first period. Alec had been worried about that from the very first day we decided on adopting a girl. I remember the urgency in his voice when we went to wake Amanda up for school one morning and came back not more than 30 seconds later whispering that her sheets were stained. Still, despite our obvious lack of personal experience in that department, we handled things rather well. Alec's experience as a big brother came in very handy. As she grew older, there were several more bumps on the road. She developed a rebellious streak as a teen, going from open and chatty to secretive and guarded. She started having boyfriends, and let me tell you, nothing can prepare you for the terror of seeing your little girl in a strange boy's arms, especially when you do not know his real intentions. But at the end of the day, she was always our little girl. We loved her, and we did everything we could do to make sure she always knew that. The end. Do you think the process of adopting a child for gay couples is too complicated? Let us know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.